The Galactic Arena was the stage for the strongest beings in the galaxy to prove their might for the glory of the Emperor. Its massive walls stood tall and intimidating as creatures from countless worlds gathered to witness the spectacle of blood and power. Marcus Juno stood at the entrance, looking up at the towering structure as he felt a chill run down his spine. He was not here to play games, he was here to make a point. His boots echoed through the cold steel floor of the waiting chamber. The eyes of his fellow gladiators watched him with a mix of curiosity and amusement. The humans were rare in these parts, and none had ever dared to step foot on this ground. Marcus knew that his presence was nothing more than a curiosity, but he wasn't going to let that define him. He was a soldier trained in the ways of combat. His past had molded him into something more than just a man. He had fought in wars across his homeworld, and now he found himself here, a gladiator among gods. He knew the odds were stacked against him, but that only made the fight more interesting. He was no stranger to being underestimated, and he had learned long ago that sometimes the best way to win was to surprise your enemy. The door in front of him slid open, revealing the vast arena stretching out before him. It was a place where the strongest of the strong fought to the death, or for their freedom. And today Marcus would enter the fray despite the roaring crowd and the exotic sights and sounds that surrounded him. Marcus remained calm, his eyes locked on the center of the arena, where his first opponent stood waiting. The creature was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its massive form towered over him with spiked armor and jagged claws. It was a brute from a distant planet, a killing machine bred for destruction. Its eyes locked onto Marcus, and a low growl escaped its throat. As the gates of the arena slammed shut behind him, Marcus took a deep breath. He had fought creatures like this before, and he had always found a way to come out on top. This creature was no different, at least that's what he told himself as he squared up ready for the first move. The creature lunged with terrifying speed, its claws slashing the air in a deadly arc. Marcus was quick on his feet, ducking just in time to avoid the blow. His training kicked in, and he instinctively rolled to the side before bringing his knee up into the creature's underbelly. The beast let out a roar of pain, but it was not enough to stop its relentless assault. Marcus could feel the adrenaline surging through his veins, but he knew he had to stay focused. He needed to find a way to use the creature's brute force against it. He couldn't match its strength, but he could outsmart it. As the beast swung its massive claws at him again, Marcus ducked and darted behind a large rock formation, using it as cover. The creature followed in pursuit, unaware of the trap waiting ahead. Marcus made his move. He sprinted towards the creature's blind side, and with a swift movement he drove his dagger into the weak point beneath its armored plating. The creature let out a shriek of pain and collapsed to the ground, its body twitching violently before it went still. The crowd erupted into deafening applause as Marcus stood victorious in the center of the arena, his chest heaving from the effort. His eyes scanned the stands, but he saw nothing but silence. The galaxy had just witnessed the first human to enter the Galactic Arena and win against a creature that had never been defeated before. Marcus knew that this was only the beginning. He had proven a point, but now he had to prove that humanity was capable of far more than anyone had ever imagined. Marcus stood over the fallen creature, its body twitching as the crowd roared with excitement. The arena had erupted into chaos with the sound of cheers and cries from the spectators, but to Marcus it felt distant, as if he were in a world of his own. His pulse still raced, and the adrenaline surged through him, but his mind was already shifting towards the next challenge. His victory had been swift, but he knew better than to think the arena would let him rest for long. As he walked toward the center of the arena, a voice boomed across the speakers, loud enough to rattle his bones. It was the voice of the arena announcer, a being with a smooth, deep tone, who made every word sound like an echo of the Emperor's will. "Congratulations, human," the announcer said in a voice laced with mockery. "You have defeated the wild beast. But this is only the beginning." Marcus ignored the voice as he took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the stands once more. The crowds had quieted some, and the alien spectators were muttering to each other in confusion, fear perhaps, or curiosity of the strange human who had just won his first fight. He was not allowed time to think about it, though, before the gates to the arena opened again. This time, the opponent was no mere animal or mindless creature. Marcus could feel it in the air. Something different was coming, and as the doors parted he saw his new adversary step into the arena. This was no beast, but a being of flesh and bone, another warrior, a humanoid figure cloaked in battle armor, its eyes glowing a piercing red as it looked at Marcus with an expression of cold disdain. The warrior was taller than Marcus, and far more heavily armed. Its sword shimmered with an eerie blue light. As it slowly approached the center of the arena, Marcus flexed his fingers, feeling the familiar weight of his own weapon. His heart was calm now. He had faced worse opponents in his past, but there was something about the stillness of this moment that gave him pause. The warrior was not making a sound. Its movements were calculated and controlled, as though it were waiting for something, and Marcus knew it would not be long before it struck. Without warning, the alien warrior lunged forward with lightning speed, its sword swinging toward Marcus in a deadly arc. Marcus barely managed to step aside, the blade missing his chest. By mere inches, the ground beneath his feet cracked from the sheer force of the blow. He didn't hesitate, his body reacting before his mind could fully process the danger. He rolled to the side and sprang to his feet. In an instant his training had kicked in. He knew he could not overpower this being in a direct clash, but he could use its speed against it. The warrior pressed forward, relentlessly swinging its sword in rapid succession. Marcus ducked and dodged, weaving between strikes, his eyes locked onto the warrior's movements, studying the rhythm of its attack. The warrior was quick, but it relied on brute force, and its strikes left openings. If Marcus could find the right moment, he could exploit them. He needed patience and focus. The warrior's sword swung down in a diagonal strike. Marcus sidestepped it and ducked low, grabbing the warrior's arm, twisting it behind its back. Before driving his knee into its side, the warrior grunted in pain, but quickly retaliated, throwing Marcus off with a swift backhand that sent him crashing to the ground. Marcus grunted as he rolled to his feet, his breathing heavy, but his resolve firm. This fight was far from over. He could feel the warrior's confidence wavering, its attacks growing slightly more erratic. Marcus smiled to himself just as the warrior lunged again, ready for his counter. Marcus could feel the sweat pouring down his face as he narrowly dodged another strike from the warrior. The arena was filled with the sound of clashing steel as the two opponents danced around each other in a deadly game of cat and mouse. Marcus's mind raced, trying to anticipate the warrior's next move. The alien's blade was a blur of motion, its attacks growing faster and more vicious with each passing second. But Marcus had already found a rhythm of his own. He could feel the creature's confidence slipping with every missed strike. Every time, Marcus evaded its attack with ease. The warrior lunged again, but Marcus was ready this time. He sidestepped the blow and drove his shoulder into the warrior's chest, sending it stumbling backward. He followed up with a sharp kick to the creature's knee, causing it to buckle. The warrior let out a roar of frustration as it tried to regain its footing, but Marcus wasn't giving it any chance to recover. He closed the distance between them quickly and drove his elbow into the warrior's throat, forcing the air from its lungs. The warrior staggered back, clutching its throat, but it was far from finished. It bared its teeth and let out a guttural growl as its eyes flared with renewed rage. Marcus knew this fight was far from over, but he had the upper hand now. He could see the doubt in the warrior's eyes as it took a step back, hesitant, unsure of its next move. Marcus took a deep breath, preparing himself for whatever came next. The warrior raised its sword again, but this time it was different. The blade hummed with energy, and Marcus could feel the shift in the air as the creature prepared for its final attack. It wasn't just strength, it was power, pure energy that could tear through anything in its path. Marcus knew he had moments at best to act before the warrior unleashed its full fury. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him, but he stayed calm and focused. It was now or never. The warrior surged forward with a roar, its sword crackling with blue energy. Marcus watched the weapon's movements carefully. The energy blade cut through the air with terrifying precision. He ducked low just in time to avoid the strike that would have cleaved him in half. But the warrior was already swinging again, a vicious overhead blow aimed at his skull. Marcus saw his opening at the last second. He twisted his body just enough to dodge the blade, and with a quick motion, grabbed the warrior's arm, spinning it behind its back. Using the creature's momentum against it in one fluid motion, he drove his knee into the warrior's spine, and then followed through with a sharp twist of its arm. There was a sickening crack as the warrior's arm broke, and it collapsed to the ground with a howl of pain. Marcus stood over it, his breathing ragged, his body aching, but he refused to let his guard down, not yet. He could feel the heat of the arena lights bearing down on him, but he didn't look at the crowd. He didn't care about the applause or the cheers. All he cared about was surviving the fight and proving that he was more than just a human in an alien world. The warrior lay on the ground, defeated, its body twitching in pain. But Marcus didn't stop there. He pulled the alien's sword from its grip and held it high. The crowd erupted in applause, but Marcus's eyes remained fixed on his fallen opponent. The victory was his, but the war was far from over. The arena was silent now as Marcus looked up at the stands. This time, the aliens were not laughing. This time, they were watching him carefully, as if they were waiting for something more. The crowd's deafening cheers filled the arena as Marcus stood tall, his chest heaving from the battle, his gaze never leaving the fallen warrior. Beneath him, he could feel the weight of their eyes all around him. The alien spectators had grown quiet after the first wave of applause had passed. Some were still staring at him with disbelief. Others, with growing fear. Marcus was becoming more than just a curiosity. He was a threat to the very system that held the galaxy in its grip. As the warriors and officials began to clear the arena, Marcus made his way to the side of the stage. The reality of what he had just accomplished started to settle in. It had been a hard-fought victory, but the next battle would be even more dangerous. He knew that no one here would let him rise to the top without testing him again and again, but he was ready for whatever came next. As he stood waiting to be escorted off the arena floor, a voice called out to him from the shadows. It was a whisper at first, but Marcus could hear it clearly. It was the voice of a woman, and it spoke with an urgency that caught his attention. "Human soldier, you've done something none of us thought possible." Her words were soft yet sharp, the kind of voice you listen to when you know there is danger in the air. Marcus turned his head toward the direction of the voice, his eyes scanning the darkened corners of the arena's passageways, but he could see no one, only the flickering lights overhead. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice low but steady. There was a brief moment of silence before the figure stepped into view, a woman dressed in the same dark garb of the arena's inner circle. Her face was partially covered by a veil, but her eyes burned with intensity. Marcus instinctively tensed, but there was something about her presence that told him she was not an enemy, just someone with information he needed. She moved closer to him, her gaze never leaving his eyes. "You are not the only one trapped here," she said. "Your victory has caught the attention of the Emperor's inner circle. They won't let you leave here alive, not if they can help it." Marcus narrowed his eyes, but he didn't respond right away. The woman was right, of course. The Emperor's power was absolute, but she was wrong about one thing. He was not here to die. "I came here to fight," he said quietly, "and if I die, so be it. But I won't go down without taking down a few of them." First, the woman studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. "You're brave," she said, "but bravery alone won't keep you alive. This arena is more than just a place of combat. It's a tool for the Emperor to control the galaxy. If you're smart, you'll leave now while you still can." Marcus stood silent for a long moment before shaking his head. "No," he said flatly, "not until I've made them see what humans are capable of." The woman's expression flickered for just a second before she spoke again. "I know you're not afraid of death, but you should be afraid of what they can do to you before you die," she said. But even as she spoke, Marcus could see the glimmer of something else in her eyes, a strange mix of fear and respect. Marcus studied her for a moment, then finally spoke with a hint of a smirk. "I'll take my chances." With that, he turned and walked toward the exit of the arena. The woman didn't stop him, but he could feel her eyes on his back as he disappeared into the darkness of the corridors ahead. Marcus was more determined than ever to finish what he had started. He had made his mark, but the real challenge was just beginning. Marcus walked through the darkened corridors of the arena, his mind racing with the words of the mysterious woman. Her warning echoed in his ears. As he moved past the cold steel walls, he had been thrust into a game of survival, one he had no intention of losing, but he could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him. This arena was not just a place for gladiators to fight, it was a tool, a way for the Emperor to keep the galaxy in check, and he had become part of that system. Whether he wanted to or not, the sounds of distant voices echoed through the hallways. As Marcus continued deeper into the arena's bowels, he could hear the whispers of his fellow fighters, the rumors and stories they told of their past victories and failures. But none of them seemed to truly understand the larger picture. They were all just pawns in the Emperor's game, and Marcus had no intention of being anyone's pawn. He had come here for a reason, and that reason was to make a statement, not just for himself, but for humanity. As he rounded a corner, he stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes narrowing, as he spotted a figure standing in front of a door. The figure was tall and imposing, their armor gleaming in the low light. Marcus recognized the figure instantly. It was Kala, the woman who had warned him earlier. She was standing motionless, her face hidden behind a helmet, her posture rigid and unyielding. For a moment, Marcus wondered if this was some sort of trap, but then he saw the faint flicker of recognition in her eyes. As she turned toward him, "You're still here," she said, her voice cold. But there was something else there, something almost reluctant. Marcus didn't answer right away. He studied her carefully. She was one of the Emperor's agents, he knew that much. But there was something different about her. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't as cold and calculating as the rest of the Emperor's enforcers, and that intrigued him. Kala didn't move as Marcus approached, but her eyes never left him, the tension between them thick and palpable. "I didn't think you'd be so foolish," she said finally, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Why stay here when you can leave? You've proven yourself. The crowds love you. You're a hero now. You could walk away and live out your life." Marcus chuckled dryly, but his eyes remained hard. "I didn't come here to be a hero," he said quietly. "I came here to prove something. Kala, you of all people should understand that you're not as loyal to the Emperor as you pretend to be." She stiffened slightly at his words, but didn't speak for a long moment. Instead, she took a step closer to him, her helmeted face inches from his. "I'm not loyal to him," she said finally, her voice low and dangerous. "But I have no choice. I'm trapped here just like you." Marcus didn't know what to make of her words. The arena was a prison, a place where power ruled everything, and anyone who defied the Emperor was either crushed or used as a pawn. Kala had just admitted it, but that didn't change anything. Marcus had made his decision, and there was no turning back now. "I don't care about your loyalty," he said flatly, "but I do care about what happens when the Emperor is finished with you and everyone else who serves him." Kala's gaze softened for the briefest of moments before she looked away. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't want to end up like you," she said. But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He had heard enough. The pieces were falling into place, and he knew that the next step was to keep moving forward. The Emperor wasn't going to stop at the arena. He was going to try and crush any hope of rebellion before it could even begin. Marcus wasn't going to let that happen. As he turned to leave, he spoke one final time. "Stay out of my way, Kala," he said. "The game is just beginning, and this time the Emperor won't control the outcome." Marcus didn't look back as he walked away. His mind was focused entirely on the next step. The Emperor was watching him now, and the game was no longer just about survival. It was about power, about making sure that the Emperor knew that no one could control him, not even a galaxy-spanning empire. But the more Marcus thought about it, the more he realized that this was bigger than just one man's rebellion. The Emperor's grip on the galaxy was suffocating, and there were more like him, more worlds trapped in this cruel game of power. He had no illusions that he could take down the Emperor alone, but he didn't have to. He had seen the strength of humanity in the faces of his fellow gladiators, the courage in their eyes as they fought their battles, even if they were forced to do so for the amusement of others. He had seen it in the alien species that had underestimated him. The belief that humans were weak was their greatest mistake, and Marcus intended to use that against them. As he moved deeper into the bowels of the arena, the sound of footsteps echoed around him. The corridor was empty for the most part, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. His hand instinctively went to the hilt of his blade as he rounded another corner and came face to face with a group of armed guards. Their uniforms were a stark contrast to the brightly colored garb of the other fighters. Their armor was sleek and dark, designed for intimidation and efficiency. Marcus didn't flinch, his eyes locking with theirs. As they blocked his path, one of them stepped forward, his voice cold and authoritative. "You're not supposed to be here, Gladiator. He said you should return to your quarters before things get unpleasant." Marcus didn't say anything at first. He simply sized up the guards. They were well-trained, no doubt, but he wasn't intimidated. They had no idea what they were dealing with. None of them had seen what he could do and backed into a corner. The guard who had spoken took a step closer, the glint of a plasma baton visible in his hand. "This is your last warning, human. Step aside, and we won't be forced to subdue you." Marcus didn't wait for him to finish speaking. Instead, he drew his blade in a swift motion and brought it up to block the incoming strike from the guard's baton. The impact was sharp, but Marcus held firm. With a quick twist, he disarmed the guard, knocking the baton from his hand, before following up with a swift kick that sent the guard stumbling back. The other guards reacted immediately, drawing their weapons and rushing toward him, but Marcus was already moving. He darted to the side, avoiding a plasma shot that burned through the air in a flash. He slid behind a pillar, using it as cover. While the guards exchanged fire from a distance, they were good, but they were not fast enough. Marcus could feel the heat of the plasma shots whizzing by him, but he wasn't going to let them get another chance. With a deep breath, he sprinted toward the nearest guard, closing the distance with surprising speed before driving his blade into the guard's side and twisting it with precision. The guard crumpled to the floor, his weapon falling uselessly from his hand. Marcus didn't stop to watch. He immediately turned to face the others, knowing that there was no time to waste. In a matter of moments, the rest of the guards lay on the ground unconscious, or worse. Marcus didn't look at their faces as he moved past them, his mind already moving ahead to the next step. His heart still pounded in his chest, but there was a new kind of fire in him, a fire that wouldn't be extinguished until he had brought the Emperor to his knees. The game was far from over, but Marcus wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. He was going to make his own. Marcus moved through the dark corridors of the arena, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The guards were down, but he knew it wouldn't be long before reinforcements arrived. The noise of combat would have drawn attention, and if he wasn't careful, the entire arena would be on alert. He couldn't afford to be caught in a fight with the entire security force. He needed to move quickly and quietly. The weight of his decisions started to settle on him as he moved deeper into the bowels of the arena. He had made it this far, but now the stakes were higher than ever. The Emperor would not take kindly to a gladiator defying his authority, and Marcus knew that there were other forces at work behind the scenes, people who wanted to see him fail, and others who might use him for their own agendas. He was becoming more than just a symbol of defiance. He was a potential catalyst for something larger than himself, a revolution, a change that could shake the very foundations of the Emperor's rule. He turned a corner and saw a narrow door at the end of the hallway. It was guarded, but not heavily. The two soldiers standing watch outside the door seemed distracted by something else, and Marcus knew this was his chance. He moved quickly, ducking into the shadows. As he approached the door, he drew his blade silently, and in one smooth motion took down the two guards before they even had time to react. With swift precision, he ensured that both were unconscious rather than dead, then quietly stepped into the room beyond. The room was dimly lit and filled with rows of consoles and monitors, a control center for the arena itself. Marcus guessed it was where the broadcasts were managed and where the arena's masters kept their eye on everything happening inside. But what caught his attention were the figures standing at the far end of the room. They were not soldiers or guards. They were officials, two beings standing near a large screen watching the events of the arena unfold on the screen. One of them was humanoid, but the other was something entirely different, a large insectoid creature with glowing eyes and a strange mechanical device attached to its back. Marcus recognized it immediately as an officer of the Emperor's secret police. The humanoid turned toward him, first his face a mask of shock and surprise, but the insectoid officer barely reacted. Its glowing eyes seemed to study him for a moment before its voice echoed out low and mechanical. "You shouldn't be here, human," it said, its voice as cold as its gaze. Marcus didn't flinch, his eyes locked onto the officer's cold stare. "I don't plan on staying long," he said, his voice steady and calm. The two officials exchanged a glance before the humanoid spoke again. "You're a fool if you think you can take down the Emperor," he said, but Marcus only smiled a little. "I'm not going to take him down by myself," he said, "but I will make sure the galaxy knows what he's done and will make sure people see that humans are not to be underestimated." The insectoid officer let out a low chuckle as it moved toward a control panel, its hands moving quickly over the keys. Marcus didn't take his eyes off the creature, but he knew the game was changing, the stakes were growing higher, and he had no choice but to push forward. Whatever happened next would be the turning point. There would be no going back. The Empire would have to reckon with the fact that one human had the courage to defy them, and that would change everything. As the insectoid officer continued to type, something shifted in the air. The monitors flickered and Marcus felt the room grow tense. Suddenly, everything felt like it was about to change again. The tension in the room was palpable. Marcus could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he watched the insectoid officer work its strange device. The monitors flickered again, and a low hum filled the air. Something was happening, and Marcus knew he didn't have much time. Whatever the officer was doing, it wasn't good. The humanoid official's eyes flicked to the insectoid creature, and then back to Marcus. "You don't understand what you've just walked into," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You're playing with forces far beyond your comprehension." Marcus stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the official's. "If I don't understand yet, I will soon enough," he said firmly. "You've underestimated humanity for too long. You think we're just gladiators, just weapons for your amusement. But I'm going to make sure you all see that we are much more than that." The insectoid officer's glowing eyes narrowed as it finished typing something on the console. Suddenly, all the monitors in the room came to life with a bright flash. The screen displayed the arena, the stands filled with spectators, and the fighters preparing for their next bouts. Marcus watched as his own image appeared on the screen. His face was covered in sweat, his body bruised, but standing tall. The crowd erupted into cheers, but Marcus barely noticed. He could feel the weight of the moment. He wasn't just a fighter anymore. He was a symbol of defiance, a symbol of what could happen when one person refused to be controlled. The humanoid official looked at the screen for a moment before turning back to Marcus. "The Emperor doesn't tolerate insurrection," he said, his voice growing cold. "You think you can inspire a rebellion, but all you're doing is making yourself a target. You're nothing but a tool for the Emperor to destroy." Marcus didn't flinch. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "I'm not the one being used here. It's you and your Emperor who are the tools. This arena is nothing more than a circus, and I've had enough of playing the part." Without another word, Marcus moved swiftly toward the insectoid officer. Before the creature could react, Marcus grabbed it by the collar and pulled it toward him, his grip tightening as he stared into its glowing eyes. "If you want to stop me, now's your chance," he said, his voice low and filled with cold determination. But the officer didn't respond. Instead, its mechanical voice crackled out, "You cannot win, human. You are just a fleeting moment in the Emperor's grand design." Marcus smiled. "Just a fleeting moment. But even fleeting moments can change the course of history," he said. The insectoid officer hissed and tried to break free, but Marcus held fast with a final movement. He shoved the creature back against the console hard enough to crack the metal and disable the device. It was using. The monitors around them flickered and went black. A deep silence fell over the room. Marcus could feel the weight of his actions settling in. He had just made a statement to the Emperor and to the galaxy that the fight was far from over. He turned to the humanoid official one last time. "You can send your forces after me all you want, but I'll keep coming back every time you try to break me. I'll return stronger," Marcus said calmly, "and when the time comes, I'll be the one to bring the Emperor down, not with brute force, but with the truth that humanity is no one's tool, and we will not be forgotten." With those final words, Marcus turned and walked out of the control room, his steps heavy but filled with purpose. The door behind him slid shut, and he disappeared into the corridors of the arena. But he knew this was only the beginning. The Emperor would come for him, but Marcus would be ready whatever happened next. The fight for freedom had begun.